There are things that don't feel dangerous at first, just wrong. Like a wall in your apartment that's colder than the rest, or a faint tapping sound that only happens at night, or discovering a door that was never mentioned in your lease. Because if there's a hidden door, the real question is, who's been using it? When I moved into apartment 4C, I wasn't excited. I was desperate. Cheap rent, old building. I didn't ask questions. The place had issues, slanted floors, knocking pipes. But one thing stood out. The far wall of my living room was always freezing. No matter how high I turned the heat, that spot felt like winter. Then came the tapping. Every night between 1 and 3 a.m. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, always the same pattern. One morning I asked my neighbor if she heard anything. The moment I mentioned my apartment, her expression changed. "You're in 4C?" she asked quietly. Then she shut the door. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Days later, I noticed dust collecting along the base of that cold wall. Fine gray powder that kept coming back no matter how often I cleaned it. So I looked closer, and I saw it. An outline. A tall rectangle hidden beneath bad paint. A door. I called the superintendent. He brushed it off immediately. "Old construction," he said, "sealed up years ago." I asked if he had a key. "There is no door," he replied. Then he left. That night, the tapping came back. But this time, there was something else. After the pattern ended, a slow scraping sound, like something dragging on the other side. The next day, I broke it open. Behind the wall was a narrow corridor, old wood, exposed pipes, and footprints. Fresh ones. That's when I noticed the holes. Small openings drilled through the walls, one facing my bedroom, one facing my living room. Someone had been watching me. There was even a chair positioned perfectly in front of one of the holes, and a mug beside it. Not old, recently used. Then I heard it. A movement deeper in the corridor. A shuffle. Then 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. I ran. The police searched the space. They found signs someone had been living there. Food wrappers, blankets, and photos of me sleeping, cooking, changing. Some taken just days after I moved in. Others from previous tenants. The superintendent disappeared that same night. Fake name. No trace. But before I left, one officer said something I'll never forget. "We found one set of footprints going toward your apartment." He paused. "And another set going away." I moved out immediately, thought it was over, until 4 months later I received a package. Inside was a photo of my new building, my window circled in red. So if you ever hear tapping in your walls, don't investigate. Some doors aren't there to keep you out. They're there to keep something in. And sometimes it's already learned how to leave. I was just doing some cleaning and found something really weird in my apartment. It started like any other Saturday. The dust bunnies under the couch had grown into full-fledged dust monsters, and the general state of my living room was starting to resemble a forgotten storage unit. I decided it was time for a deep clean, the kind where you move all the furniture and actually vacuum behind it. This was a rare occurrence, I'll admit, but necessary. My apartment, while not ancient, definitely had some character. It was an older building, the kind with thick walls and creaky floors, which usually just meant charm, not secrets. I was wrestling with an old, heavy bookshelf that I'd inherited from my grandmother. It was placed against the longest wall in the living room, always a pain to move. After much grunting and strategic leveraging, I finally managed to pull it a few feet away from the wall, revealing a section that hadn't seen daylight or a cleaning cloth in years. That's when I noticed it. A strange patch on the wall behind where the bookshelf usually sat. It wasn't just discolored, it looked different from the rest of the wall. The wallpaper in that section seemed to be applied differently, almost like an afterthought, and the texture underneath felt off. Curiosity, as they say, killed the cat, but in my case it just made me poke at walls. I reached out and tapped on the suspicious area. Instead of the solid thud I expected from a plaster wall, there was a distinct, hollow sound. It wasn't a small hollow spot either. It sounded like a significant void behind the surface. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't just a patch of bad plaster. This was something else entirely. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a butter knife, my go-to tool for delicate prying. Carefully, I started to peel back some of the old wallpaper around the edges of the strange patch. It came off surprisingly easily, suggesting it hadn't been properly adhered in the first place, or maybe it was just very old. As the layers of floral pattern and faded glue peeled away, a dark line began to appear beneath. At first, I thought it was just a crack in the plaster, but as I removed more wallpaper, the line grew clearer, more defined. It was straight, precise, and cut through what looked like a thin layer of wood. And that's when I saw it, a small old wooden door, totally hidden. It wasn't flush with the wall, it was slightly recessed, almost perfectly camouflaged by the hastily applied wallpaper. The wood was dark, aged, and looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, maybe even longer. There was no handle, no knob, just a faint outline of a door frame. It looked like something from a forgotten story, right here in my own living room. The thought of what could be behind it sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of excitement and a touch of apprehension. My apartment, which I thought I knew inside and out, suddenly held a secret. This wasn't some minor DIY job gone wrong. This was clearly an intentional concealment. The way it was hidden so thoroughly made me wonder about its purpose. What was so important that it needed to be walled off and forgotten? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The door was really stuck, like it hadn't been opened in ages. I pushed on it gently at first, then harder, but it wouldn't budge. It felt sealed, almost as if it had been painted over countless times, each layer adding to its stubborn refusal to open. I ran my fingers along the faint seam where the door met the wall, feeling for any kind of latch or handle. But there was nothing. Just smooth, old wood and stubborn resistance. It was frustrating, but also made me even more determined. What was behind this door that someone went to such lengths to hide it and then to seal it so completely? I tried again, putting my shoulder into it, but the door held firm. My apartment wasn't huge, and this hidden door was taking up a significant portion of my mental energy. I needed to know. The mystery was too compelling to leave unsolved. I knew I couldn't just leave it there, half revealed, constantly wondering. I needed to see what was on the other side. My curiosity had officially surpassed any lingering hesitation. I ended up getting some tools from my small toolbox in the kitchen. First, I tried a flathead screwdriver, wedging it into the tiny gap and attempting to pry. The wood groaned a little, but the door still didn't move. I could hear small splinters cracking, but the main structure remained stubbornly in place. This wasn't going to be an easy job. Whatever was holding it shut was strong, or perhaps just very old and fused. Next, I grabbed a small crowbar. It felt a bit extreme for an apartment mystery, but at this point, I was committed. I carefully positioned the crowbar into the narrowest part of the seam, near what I guessed would be the hinge side. With a deep breath, I applied pressure. The wood protested with a low, grinding sound, and then with a sudden loud crack, a section of the doorframe gave way. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment, making me jump. It was louder than I expected, a sharp, almost violent noise that broke the silence. Dust, fine and ancient, puffed out from the newly created gap, making me cough. The air instantly smelled musty like damp earth and forgotten things. It was a smell that promised old secrets, a scent that had been trapped for decades. I paused, heart pounding, half expecting a swarm of spiders or something worse to emerge. But there was nothing. Just the smell and the dust motes dancing in the light filtering in from my window. I continued to pry, moving the crowbar along the edge of the door. It was a tight fit, and each movement was a struggle. The wood was old and dry, splitting in places, but slowly, painstakingly, the door began to yield. It wasn't opening like a regular door, swinging on hinges. Instead, it was more like it was being pulled away from the wall, breaking free from whatever had sealed it shut. It made a loud, drawn-out creaking sound as it finally gave way, a sound that vibrated through the floor and up my arms. It sounded like an old ship groaning in a storm, a long, mournful cry of protest. With a final desperate heave, the door shifted inward, not swinging open but rather falling slightly ajar, creating a dark, narrow opening. It wasn't a neat opening. The edges were jagged where the wood had splintered, and the dust continued to billow out. The air rushing out from the gap was cold, noticeably colder than the air in my living room, carrying with it that distinct, old, forgotten smell. It was an opening just wide enough for me to peer into, but too narrow to easily step through. The effort had been significant, leaving me a little breathless and covered in a thin layer of grime. But the door was open. The hidden space was finally revealed. Inside, it was completely dark and dusty. The air that rushed out was cold and carried that same musty, earthy smell I had noticed earlier. It felt ancient, like opening a tomb. I pulled out my phone, switched on the flashlight, and pointed it into the void. The beam cut through the thick dust motes dancing in the air, illuminating a small, enclosed space. It was exactly as I had imagined, or perhaps exactly as I had feared. The space was small, like a tiny closet, maybe 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide. The walls inside were rough, unpainted plaster, and the floor was just bare, unfinished wood. They were covered in a fine layer of gray dust, indicating that no one had stepped foot in there for a very long time. My heart, which had been racing with anticipation, began to slow down a little. This wasn't a grand chamber, or a secret passage leading to another part of the building. It was just a small, empty room. I scanned the space with my flashlight, moving the beam slowly from side to side, up and down. There were no shelves, no hooks, no hidden compartments, no old boxes, no forgotten letters, no long-lost valuables, nothing. It was completely bare. The only thing I could see was the faint outline of some old, dried-up cobwebs clinging to the corners, and the occasional spider scurrying away from the light. It was, in a word, empty. It was kind of anticlimactic, to be honest. After all that effort, all the prying and cracking and the suspense of what might be behind such a well-hidden door, to find absolutely nothing was a bit of a letdown. My mind had conjured up all sorts of possibilities: hidden treasure, a secret diary from a previous tenant, perhaps even a forgotten historical artifact. Instead, I found dust and darkness. But even though it was empty, it was still super strange to find. Why would someone go to such lengths to create and then conceal an empty space like this? It wasn't a functional room. It didn't seem to serve any purpose at all, other than to exist as a void behind a wall. Was it a mistake during construction? An architectural oddity? Or was there a purpose that had long since been forgotten, its contents removed decades ago, leaving only the shell behind? I leaned closer, trying to see if there were any markings on the walls, any scratches or faint writing that might offer a clue, but there was nothing. The plaster was uniformly plain, aged and dusty. It was a blank slate, holding no answers, only more questions. The air inside smelled different now that it was open, still musty, but with a faint hint of something dry and inert, like old wood and settled dust. There was no fresh air circulation, just stagnant stillness. I stood there for a few minutes, just staring into the darkness, trying to process the sheer emptiness of it all. It felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, or a story that ended abruptly without a conclusion. The mystery wasn't about what was in the space, but why the space existed at all. The very act of concealing it suggested importance, but its current state offered no explanation. It was a hidden door to nowhere, a secret that revealed nothing. I took a few pictures with my phone just to document the discovery. The flash illuminated the dust and the rough plaster, making the emptiness even more stark. It was a strange trophy of my afternoon's adventure. I carefully pushed the door back into place, not completely sealing it, but just enough to cover the opening. The creaking sound was softer this time, less of a protest and more of a sigh. The musty smell lingered in the air of my living room for a while, a subtle reminder of the secret I had uncovered. So, it turns out it was just an empty, hidden space. No treasure, no secret passages leading to other rooms or mysterious tunnels, no ancient scrolls or forgotten gold. Just a void, a small testament to a past decision I couldn't understand. But it was still a wild discovery in my own apartment. It makes you wonder what else might be hidden in old buildings, in walls and underfloors, forgotten by time and previous occupants. My apartment, which I thought I knew completely, had held this one small, silent secret. And now, it was no longer a secret, even if its purpose remained elusive. The quiet mystery of the empty space was now part of my home's story.